Hi, everybody. Welcome to class. Today we're going to talk about performances. This is chapter 3 in this current edition. So, our discussion assignment for today, we're going to describe doing gender, the gender rules. We're going to talk about the projection of the theories. The current theory is the learning model of socialization. What it means to do gender cross-culturally, interculturally, and different variations for the gender rules, gender policing, why we follow the rules, why we break the rules, how we break the rules, how non-binary people present as non-binary and some of the issues that they face, and why being culturally intelligible is so important. So, doing gender, despite what we think and what we would commonly assume, we are always doing gender. When you are actively portraying gender, obeying the rules, or breaking the rules, even if you consider yourself to be non binary or gender fluid, you're actively doing gender at all times. We don't think we're doing gender, and that's because it's so internalized and socialized within us that it's not something that we actively have to consider or think about unless we're portraying gender in a new way or in a way that is less common in our culture. But everything we do, we're actively doing gender. When we are sitting, the way that you sit, the way that you walk, the way that you put your shirt on and off. Women tend to pull their sleeves into, or their arms into their sleeves and then pull their shirt over their head. Men tend to grab the back of their shirt and pull it over their head. So every little thing you do, like, ironically, how you get dressed and how you get undressed, how you hold your hands when you talk or you express yourself when you talk, men tend to put their palms down, so they talk like this, and they tend to bring their hands in or their fingers in. Women tend to have their hands up when they talk, and they will splay their fingers out. So you see a lot of women, especially on YouTube, they do this a lot, right, with their nails pointing out, and they're even able to like arch their hands so that their fingers are like pulled back. This trips me out, by the way, that women can do this. But men tend to do this. Men tend to also be more likely to put their hands or their palms down. And believe it or not, we tend to think this is being open. We see somebody doing this, showing their palms, they're being open or they're being kind of weak. People who do this are taken more seriously. So if you want somebody to believe you or you want people to kind of control a room, doing this or doing this is going to get you a lot more control. Men who sit, not sitting high enough, but you'll see people who will put their fingers away, but their thumbs are sticking out. That's also a power move. It's something you very rarely see women do. Like men stick their hands in their pockets and leave their thumbs out. Um, that's a very masculine way of sitting. And then we all know about like gendered sitting. Women tend to sit with their knees and closed and their ankles crossed or their legs crossed. Men tend to sit with their legs open, their knees open. They will take up more space. Take a look around in your classroom. You will see if you have desks that aren't individual desks, if you have desks at your workplace or in your classroom, that are like shared desks, not only will men sit with their arms and their legs wider, but they'll take their stuff and spread it out further. So they'll put things from their left out all the way to the right, and they'll take up more space in general in any type of situation that they're in, from a bus to a classroom to a workplace. So we're constantly doing gender, even though we're not thinking about it. Um, One of the stories in the beginning of this chapter is kind of a fun story, and it's about a little boy who is learning gender, and because people are more accepting of allowing kids to develop in their own way through their gendered performances. This little boy was wearing a beret to school, and he met a lot of resistance from the other kids, especially boys in his classroom, where they said, "You're not a boy because you're wearing a beret." And he insisted that his mom said, "Boys have penises, anyone can wear a beret." And the little boy was like, "No, absolutely not. Um, you know, only, and basically, only girls wear berets." And the little boy got so frustrated, he eventually pulled his pants down and said, "Look, I have a penis." The other little boy was completely unfazed, and he said, "Well, everyone has a penis, but only girls wear berets, right?" And that's that kind of like rigid expectation that kids will fall into right around age 6, where they fall into this kind of category where everything becomes very rigid, including the gender rules and gender roles that they're learning. And that's likely where that child was, right? So he was completely unfazed, and he said, "No, no, no, you're still a girl because you're wearing a beret," right? So in this boy's mind, it didn't have anything to do with your external genitalia. It had everything to do with the way that you present yourself in dress. And that's because, especially for little kids, but for all of us, we're constantly following these gendered prescriptions that are socialized to us. And we break these rules, but we also really learn these rules and learn to internalize them. Take a second and shake your head no, and then shake your head yes. Those probably feel really comfortable to you. Like it's a normal thing as somebody from a Western culture to say yes or to say no. In Indian cultures, you will see people do something called the head wobble. So take a moment and try that. Try doing the head wobble. Just, appease me for a moment, even though I can't see you. Try it out. What you'll find with the head wobble, right, is that it's probably quite uncomfortable for you. And the reason why is because we, as Western, predominantly Western people, don't tend to do that kind of behavior, right? We don't do that head wobble. By the way, this means like I'm listening, I don't know, I agree, right? It means all the like that's a very very common thing to do in India. And you'll see it quite often, and it's very comfortable for most Indian people to do it. It doesn't feel unusual or weird. And it's because it's a habit that's comfortable, socialized, and internalized. And if you take that into consideration and you compare that to how we do gender, then you start to realize these things that you are thinking are innate, like talking with your hands like this, right? Or like this, right? Or doing this, right? Or just the way that you sit. Are you sitting with your legs open? Are you sitting with your legs crossed right now, right? You probably didn't give it any thought. It's just about being comfortable. It's because it's internalized for you. So what happens is as we're doing gender roles, we know these mainstream roles. We know what they are. We've learned them from a very young age. We learn them through our family, our friends, our classmates, the media, art, history, just everywhere, everything we do in life, we're constantly learning and relearning gender. And it helps us to navigate through our society, right? It tells us how we're supposed to behave in terms of the gender we want to portray. It also, though, means that we are capable of breaking those rules, and there's different ways which we can break those rules. So you don't just do gender for in one specific way and in the same way throughout your whole life. There's a whole variety of ways to do gender. We have cross-cultural variations of doing gender, and that means that doing gender from one culture to another, one country to another changes. Here's an example, a picture of President Bush with, I don't remember which Middle Eastern leader this is, and they're holding hands. And in the Middle East, it's fairly common um, for men to hold hands. It's a sign of friendship. It's a sign of um, trust with each other. And so for us as American, having an American or a Western lens, this would look unusual, right? That we would see two men, especially two powerful men, holding hands. But what President Bush is doing in this regard is he is accommodating to another culture's gendered expectation, right? And that's why he would be holding hands with another very powerful leader. We do this as well in our own culture, and so sometimes we'll see what we call intracultural variation. Intracultural variation is where the dominant culture might say, okay, this type of behavior is not acceptable, but within a particular subculture, it is. So for men in general, it's not acceptable for them to touch each other, grab each other, or smack each other in the butt. Um, but within sports, which is a subculture of our dominant American culture, it is not only acceptable, but it's expected for men to touch each other, touch each other's butts, smack each other, and grab each other. And so the cultural rule changes. And so we would call this an intracultural variation. And we see it, we might see it in subcultures, we see it in regards to different, just even different things that you do. So it might be your music culture, it might be sports culture, it could be from nightclubs to your profession to your school. So you're expected to behave differently based on whether you're in school or at a nightclub or at a wedding or at a party, right? So every different place that you go is very different cultural expectations. And we are expected to, and we understand actually really well how to modify our gendered behavior based on those intracultural variations. So not only do gender rules change from one country to another or from one subculture to another, but they also change over time. The picture is missing here, but I put up a picture of a K-pop star. So the textbook's talking about how there's kind of a new cult of male beauty, and K-pop stars are kind of leading this idea that masculine beauty can also include lots of jewelry, lots of pastel colors, more feminine what we would consider more feminine presentation. I just want to point out it's not necessarily a brand new idea in that you see variations of feminine presentation for what we would have considered very masculine men, even in the 80s. So I gave you, here's a couple pictures. One is of Poison, and the other, these are rock stars from the 1980s and early 90s. And what you see there is their presentation, the way that they're wearing their makeup. They're wearing light lips and lots of eyeshadow, and their hair is long, and their hair is got lots of volume and with lots of hairspray, right? And so this was a presentation of masculine beauty in the 80s and 90s as well. So you do see this. It's not just something that the current generations are doing, but you see this kind of presentation and change of masculinity that occurs with every single generation that emerges. A good example of contextual variation or changing your gendered presentation based on context or cultural traveling is something we would call, or is goths. Goths are a good example of this. So you see very different presentations of gender based on these subcultures. And when you move from one culture to another, for example, you present as goth in your everyday life or when you go out to a nightclub, but then when you go to work, you might be wearing a suit and tie or business clothes. We would call this cultural traveling. Even when you change the way that you present your femininity or masculinity or gendered presentation based on different events that you attend, like a day event, a day wedding versus a night wedding, or your workplace uh, versus somewhere that you would go for fun, right? Like going out to the movies or to a party or something like that. We would call this cultural traveling. So you're changing that presentation. And we, in our everyday lives, do this all the time. We go back and forth, right? We move back and forth and make cultural adjustments based on where we're going to be and who's going to be seeing us. Okay, so not in the text anymore. Lisa Wade talked about these prior, but she doesn't talk about it in the current edition of the text. She moves straight into the learning model of socialization. So I'm going to describe that one first. It's on the bottom. The learning model of socialization is the theory or assertion that socialization is a lifelong learning process, that we're always learning and relearning gendered expectations, and that we're constantly negotiating the rules, right, and the gendered expectations. This is the model that's accepted today, and it's accepted by most scientists and sociologists. There were previous models. One was the first prescription, and then lifelong learning, and then the injection model. So the first prescription essentially says that you learn gender, you learn it from infancy, but you learn it in one shot, right? Today, we do believe that you learn gender from infancy, but that you're constantly learning and relearning gender. One of the other ones was that the injection model, and that's the idea that as children we're genderless and then we're dosed with or injected with gender and essentially become the portrayal of the society in which we live. So like almost like victims of how we're injected with the gender model. And this is kind of a very rigid idea of how we learn masculinity or femininity. We don't any longer really accept this theory as one that we consider to be accurate, because we believe that people are constantly learning and relearning their gender and accommodating. Not only do you accommodate over your lifetime how you portray your gender, but you accommodate from day to day how you portray your gender when you're casual with your friends versus how you portray your gender when you're with your parents, for example, is going to be very different. I have kind of a funny anecdote about that. I guess maybe funny to me. So when I was in doing my doctoral work in Delaware, um, the it was on a college campus. It was an unusual college campus in that the college classes were intermixed with the main street and also like bars and restaurants and stuff. And so there was like Parents Week or Parents Weekend. And at the time when I was going to school, mini skirts that only went down to the top half of your butt were in style. So you had like a mini skirt that went from your waist down, but down to like halfway covering your butt. So the bottom half of your butt would hang out. So this was really a popular style among a lot of the girls. And they all had these mini skirts, and everybody wore these mini skirts all the time. And everybody's like bottom half of their rear end was hanging out all the time, if it was warm enough. And then I knew when it was Parents Week. Now I was a graduate student, so my parents weren't coming, but this is like the undergrads. I knew when it was Parents Week because amazingly, the skirts not only covered their butts, but went all the way down to their knees. So now all of a sudden, all the girls are wearing skirts that went all the way down to their knees. And I remember the first year I saw this, I thought it was just really kind of funny and odd and a strange thing because personally, I don't portray my sexuality or my gender any differently when I'm amongst my friends versus my parents. I don't feel like I have to change my portrayal of my gender. But it was such a stark difference, and by so many of the students, from their rear end hanging out to all the way, skirts all the way down to their knees and their little pearls and everything that they would be wearing. I thought it was a really interesting way to change your presentation of gender based on who you were presenting for. So going on with learning the gendered rules, right? We were talking about how we learn them. So we do tend to begin learning gender in infancy. Some of us would really say you're learning gender before you're even born, even when you're in utero, because we're gendering babies before they're born, and we treat baby girls and baby boys so different. For example, we are very likely to hold babies differently based on whether we think that they're a boy or a girl. We're more likely to throw a boy up in the air and lose contact, right? Throw a baby boy up in the air and lose contact. But if it's a baby girl, we don't do that. Even if we throw her up in the air, we never lose contact with her physical body. We're more likely to describe baby girls as small and petite and fragile, and baby boys as big and strong and tough. Even though infants look identical, if you're not looking at their primary genitalia, they look the same, they weigh almost exactly the same, and they have the same physical characteristics. They've done studies where they put girls into boy clothing and baby boys into girl clothing. The way that we talked to them, the way that we held them, the way that we treated them completely changed based on the clothing that they were wearing. So we do this enough that we're really highly socializing boys and girls in a different way based on our idea of what their gender is going to be, right? Based on their sex, their external genitalia. We are more likely, those baby carriers are becoming really popular today. Back when I had kids, they weren't very popular. You couldn't get them. You could only get them for hiking. But now they're extremely popular. Almost everybody has one. And one of the things that they've noted is that for girls, we almost always put the girls into those carriers facing their mothers. So we face the little girls. And with little boys, we tend to put them into the carriers and face them out to the world. And what this does is it helps to internalize the socialized ideas about what boys are better at and what girls are better at. So boys are more likely to be engrossed in play, to be more independent, to be more adventurous in the world. Girls are more likely to be able to read expressions, to be more empathetic, to be more focused on family and other children. So what have we done? We've taken our ideologies and we've socialized our children to kind of fit into those ideologies. Because if you face a baby towards you, they're more likely to study your face, right? But if you're facing them out into the world, they're gonna be looking at the world, and it's gonna change the way that they interact with the world around them as they get older. By the time the kids are 2.5, they pretty much know their own gender, and this includes trans children, not just cis children. So we might assume cis children are going to know their gender, right? A little girl who has the external genitalia that's a girl, she's going to say, I'm a girl, I'm female. And little boys will say they're boys. But trans children also tend to follow the same gender developmental trajectory as cis children. So even if their gender identity doesn't match their external biological body, they still tend to identify as their gender identity at about the same age, which is about 2.5 years old. By the time that kids are about 5 years old, they've done a really great job at absorbing a lot of those contradictory, complex, nuanced, gendered skills and lessons that we've taught them. So they really do actually understand a lot of that gendered information, even the contradictory gendered information that we tend to teach to babies and children and kids and adults all the way through. What we call this is your first set of gendered binary glasses. If I haven't explained it before, gendered binary glasses are your ability as a person to gender everything in the world around you. Like, so for example, cats and dogs. We make the assumption dogs are boys, cats are girls. Big dogs are always boys. My female Great Dane is always a boy. Small, cute, fluffy white dogs are always girls, right? So we are really good at gendering everything around us. Guitars. So electric guitars, masculine. Acoustic guitars, feminine. I mean, you could literally do that with anything, right? And we are really, really good at that because we've had a ton of practice at gendering things in our culture, and we call those gender binary glasses. By the time kids are like 6 years old, developmentally, they become extremely kind of, this is the point where they become the most rigid. So when that is taken into consideration, or when you compare this to gender, that means that they tend to be very rigid in their gendered rules, adhering to gendered rules, expecting other people to adhere to gender rules. And this is often when parents will give up, fine, just take the boy toy or the girl toy that, they just allow their kids to kind of, get what they want at that point, right? And they stop kind of fighting that gendered binary expectation that the child is imposing, because kids are becoming very rigid around that time. It's just interesting too, because it doesn't just portray itself in terms of gender. Kids are very concrete and rule-based at that age, and so things have to follow one direction or the other. You'll notice that their art tends to start to become more concrete at that age. So that is the phase in where their brain is that way. This was also right around the time where, if you think about going back into the chapter, Jeremy's classmate told him, everyone has a penis, only girls wear barrettes, right? It doesn't matter what your body looks like. The gendered rule is only girls wear barrettes, according to that little boy, right? So he couldn't fathom, he couldn't have his mind changed because he had already made that decision on that gendered rule. Ironically, though, this is also the point where kids start to actively resist gendered expectations, where you might to see them start to counter them. The book says today parents are increasingly supporting their children's wishes to break gendered rules, and I would say yes, that's true, but I wouldn't make the assumption that it's just parents of today. So, I mean, Gen X there was a pretty large movement during Generation X to allow children to grow up displaying their gender any way they felt was appropriate. Ironically, although young people today, so millennials and Gen Zers, tend to think they're the ones who are making those kind of leaps and saying, well, we're the ones breaking the gendered rules and being more gender fluid or gender non-binary, right? It was actually Gen Xers who had kind of opened that door for their children, millennials and Gen Zers, to portray themselves in that way. So although we talk about it as moving forward in that regards today, and it is. It's not that it just started today. So why do we follow the rules? Well, we follow the rules because it feels good, right? So they have a quote from Billie Eilish. Did I put it in here? I don't know if I put it in. Oh, it's all about what makes you feel good, right? So we follow the rules because it's habitual. We're used to it, right? Think about the way you walk, the way you talk, the way you sit, the way you put your shirt on, the way you take your shirt off, the way you smoke a cigarette. Everything that you do is kind of habitual and learned. It's comfortable to you. You might be portraying gender for other people. The pandemic's a good example of how, because we didn't have other people's gazes upon us, a lot of people decided to not necessarily follow the expected gender rules that they had been. And so we saw a lot of men grow their hair out long, grow their beards out. We see a lot more women not wearing makeup. We see a lot of people wearing more comfortable clothing and casual clothing. We see much more of a push among women to not wear underwire bras, to wear more comfortable bras out in public. So doing gender for others was also part of that, like being policed, right? So being gendered policed is one of the ways, one of the most predominant ways in which we're socialized into gender. And it becomes habit for us, right? So, um, when you're especially a young girl, right, your mom might say, "Oh, you look really pretty in dresses. You should wear dresses more often." Or, "Oh, if you're a young man, you might hear, 'Oh, you look really good when you cut your hair. You should get your hair cut more often.'" Or if you are trans, or if you are gender nonconforming, you might be hearing questions like, what are you doing, or why are you wearing that, or I don't understand, right? So we get all kinds of gendered policing. Sometimes it's praise. "Oh, you look so pretty in dresses." Or sometimes it's teasing. "Oh, you look like only girls wear barrettes," right? Or you might get, what are you trying to be? Who are you? What are you trying to do?" Right? You get that kind of um, questioning that's almost like this insulting questioning. And especially if you're a gendered non-conforming person, or you're part of the LGBTQ plus community, and women as well, they're much more likely to see rape and or violence as part of the way that they're gendered policed. So women and people in minority groups um, are much more likely to be gendered policed through physical violence, rape. Sometimes it's verbal violence. And it's a response, right, to the violation of the rules. And the rules are aimed at all of us, and they're trying to get all of us to conform. And so sometimes they'll use positive sanctions to get you to conform. Maybe your mom's going to use a positive sanction, but your friends are going to use a negative one, like teasing. It's not only something that we do to other people, but it's also something that we do to ourselves and our own friends. Sometimes we do it because we're trying to help somebody, or we think it's good intentions. "Oh, you look so pretty. You should wear that more often," or "You should wear makeup more often." "Oh, you're so pretty when you smile," right? Or looking in the mirror and saying, "I don't look good in that," or "I can't go outside unless I'm wearing A, B, and C," right? We're gender policing ourselves. And we will even recruit other people to help gender police ourselves. "Do I look good in this? Do you think I should be wearing this?" Right? Um, it's not that it's completely wrong to promote conformity, because conformity does help us to navigate the world around us. It allows us ease of access into different groups within society, but it also can make it really difficult, especially when we encounter verbal assaults, violence, emotional abuse, rape, and those types of things. And all of that can be coupled with that gendered policing. We can see it occur to a whole variety of people, but especially people who are in the LGBTQ plus community. So, how do we break the rules? Well, there's a couple ways in which you can break the rules. By the way, these are all pictures of bitch face, in case you were wondering. And who gets to do bitch face, right? So if you're a young girl, you're pretty, especially if you're white, you probably are going to get scolded or gender policed more often for doing bitch face. Oh, you'd be so pretty if you just smiled more often, right? But if you're higher status, the Queen of England, or you have a lot of money, you can make that face and nobody's going to tell you anything. So one of the ways in which you can break gender rules is through status, money, or being part of a dominant group. You can also break the rules in other ways if you don't have status. One of the ways we do it is to simultaneously break and affirm the rules. So you follow the rule but break it at the same time. You're seeing a picture of this. You have a tuxedo ball gown being worn. That's a good example of breaking the rules and affirming the rules. Kilts, when men wear kilts in America, they are both breaking and following the rules because they're wearing a skirt, but they're wearing a cultural skirt that is meant for men, so they're following the rules at the same time. Or you can offer an account. Well, I can't um, I can't shave my legs because I'm gonna have because I have a skin condition and it'll make me break out. Or I can't smile because I have a infection in my tooth and it will hurt, right? So if we offer an account, people let us get away with breaking the rules sometimes. So you'll see that often is that people will offer an account. Here's kind of a like a silly example on the right here. She says, smiling gives you wrinkles, resting bitch face keeps you pretty. So she is both offering an account here and breaking the rules and affirming the rules all at the same time, right? So if I don't smile, I'm going to stay pretty. This is following the feminine aesthetic that all women are supposed to be pretty no matter how old they get. But all women are supposed to be friendly and nice and always smiling. So she's breaking the rules at the same time. When so we've kind of been talking about the gender binary, male and female, right? But even if you were to consider yourself non-binary, you're still doing gender all the time. One of the biggest problems that people who consider themselves to be gender fluid or non-binary face is that there's not really a clear-cut way to culturally appear as non-binary. In other words, there's no specific clothes, there's no specific colors, and there's no specific mannerisms that are non-binary, right? We could say maybe like beige is non-binary, but other than that, like really, there is no way to really present yourself as non-binary. The closest that a lot of people come is instead of presenting as non-binary, they send mixed messages. They choose from both sides of the binary what they prefer to do on that particular day and what they want to do. And they present themselves as non-binary through sending mixed messages. So one of the examples from the text, a girl named Jessie says, the closest you can come to passing as non-binary is making people unable to classify you. And she says, presenting as non-binary ironically means that non-binary that was wrong. She says that because you can't pass as something people don't recognize. And what she's saying here is that presenting as non-binary in today's day and age means that you're culturally unintelligible. People don't recognize it. That's really kind of the example of the definition of cultural unintelligibility. Presenting as non-binary, though, essentially means that the people who say they're non-binary almost are probably the most of an expert in what it means to understand the gender binary. Why is that? Because they're the ones thinking about gender binary. They're the ones that are specifically, actively, consistently identifying it, considering it, and rejecting or accepting different attributes that are part of the binary. So they are consciously thinking about the binary and how to present themselves in ways that most people who are cis don't have to consciously think about. Um, so they're actually much more highly aware of what it means to be part of that binary, or what is part of each one of the binaries. And they are aware more when they're breaking the rules. The number one rule is that you have to do gender in some way, right? So, what our culture currently gets really confused about, some people get really upset about, is when you're outside of any type of symbolic meaning. If you're doing gender or anything in a way that people don't understand where you're coming from, then people can get confused or upset. So we expect people, whether they're following the rules, breaking the rules, or even doing gender non-binary or gender fluidity, we're expecting people to do it in such a way that it's culturally intelligible, that we can understand, decipher, and know how to navigate around. And so that's what we kind of force people into. Whether you're following binary or not, we're expecting people to do gender in some way that we can understand. Even when you're in part of the LGBTQ community, if you go into a subculture and you're part of like the lesbian community or the gay male community, you will see that you might be gender policed sometimes more fervently in those communities than you would be outside of those communities. Because even though they're not following the dominant culture's gender rules, they still expect people within their community to be culturally intelligible. And they expect them to be culturally intelligible often in such a way that they're following the gender rules of that subculture, meaning you look and act like you're a lesbian female or a trans male or a masculine gay male, right? They're expecting those types of presentations, and they can also end up gender policing you. We even see this within subcultures. So within Hispanic gay cultures, gay male cultures, those men are policed in a different way. It's acceptable to have sex with other men in Hispanic gay cultures. It's not acceptable to present as a feminine gay male. So they're still expected to act as though they're a masculine gay male or a masculine male, to act as though they're dominant over all women, and to be seen as an effeminate gay male is to be presenting gayness as white gayness within that subculture. So even within those subcultures, you see expectations for doing gender and doing gender in the way that they find culturally intelligible and acceptable. So I hope you liked the lecture for today. We're at 44 minutes. And that was it, right? The last question, if men and women aren't naturally opposite, then why do they act so differently so much of the time? Hopefully now you can answer that question fairly easily, and I hope you have a great day.